You know that faint, musty smell in the basement or the back of a closet? Is it just an old house thing, or is it something more? For a lot of people, that smell is a real source of anxiety. But what if we treated it like a mystery? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do. Today, we're putting on our detective hats to uncover the clues to a healthier home. Right? We've all been there. You catch that damp, kind of earthy smell, and you just wonder, is that just an old house or something else? And that's a fantastic question because, that smell, it's often the very first clue that you might have an unwelcome guest hanging around. And here's the really tricky part. The real problem often isn't what you can see at all. Mold loves to hide. It loves those dark, damp places, inside your air ducts, behind the walls, maybe under the floorboards. And that's exactly why just looking around, well, it's just not enough to crack this case. So when you bring in a professional mold inspector, I want you to think of them as a detective arriving on the scene. Seriously, they come armed with this whole specialized toolkit, and they're ready to uncover clues that are completely invisible to the rest of us. Okay, so how do they find the source of the problem without, tearing your house apart? Well, they use some pretty cool tech. Tools like thermal cameras can actually see hidden moisture behind walls, and moisture meters, they give a direct reading on the spot. It all comes down to the number one rule of mold investigation, and it's simple. Find the water and you are gonna find the mold. But what about those really tough spots? The ones you can't just point a camera at? That's where something called a borescope comes in. It's basically this tiny little camera on a flexible tube that can snake right into a wall cavity through a super small hole. This gives the inspector a direct look at a potential problem area, with almost no damage at all. All right, so once our detective has surveyed the scene with all their cool gadgets, it's time to gather some physical evidence. This is where we shift gears from high-tech inspection to some real hard science. Let's dig into how they actually do it.
Okay, the strategy here is actually pretty simple, but it's brilliant. The inspector takes an air sample inside your home, right near where they suspect the problem is. Then, and this is key, they take another sample outside. Why? To get a baseline, a control sample of the natural mold levels in your area. Then the lab just compares the two. The big takeaway here is that we're not looking for zero mold. That's impossible. We're looking for an abnormal amount of it.
And this is the device that makes it all happen. It's called a bioaerosol sampling pump. It basically just pulls a very precise amount of air through this little cassette, and that cassette traps any spores floating around. It's a totally scientific way to capture that invisible evidence that's just, floating around in your home. Now, this next part is absolutely critical for making sure the results are trustworthy. The inspector does not analyze the samples themselves. Instead, they're sent off to an independent third-party lab. This is so important because it eliminates any conflict of interest, right? It ensures your results are based on pure, unbiased science. So the lab has the evidence. Now what happens? Well, they've got a few different tests they can run. And honestly, it can seem a little confusing at first. But really, each test is just a different tool for a very specific job. Let's break down the most common ones so it all makes sense. I mean, it makes sense, right? You don't always need the exact same information. So the right test really depends on your specific situation. Like, can you see the mold? Are there specific health concerns? Let's take a look at the options.
Okay, this chart breaks it down perfectly. First up, you've got air sampling. We've talked about this one. It's great when you suspect a problem, but you can't actually see it. Now, if you can see what looks like mold, a simple surface swab or tape test is the way to go. That'll tell you the exact species you're dealing with. And then, for more complex situations, say you need to know the long-term history of a house, or for someone who's really sensitive, there's something called an ERMI test. That one uses DNA analysis to paint a really complete picture.
So you're probably wondering, what does this stuff cost? Well, to give you a real-world idea, those standard tests like the air or surface samples, they typically run about $125 per sample. And don't forget, you usually need at least two, right? One inside and that outdoor control sample for comparison. Knowing this up front just helps you understand the investment you're making to get clear, reliable answers. Okay, so after all this investigation, all this data collection, it all leads to the final report. This is the payoff. It's a detailed document that takes all that scientific data and transforms it into a clear, actionable plan for what to do next. But wait, the story doesn't just end with the cleanup. After the remediation pros have done their work, you're left with this one massive question. How do you know for sure that the problem is really gone? This is where something called post-remediation verification, or PRV, comes into play. You might also hear it called clearance testing. Think of it as the final chapter in our detective story. It's an independent retesting of the area after the cleanup, just to confirm the job was done right and the space is truly safe. And honestly, the single biggest mistake a homeowner can make is skipping this step.
And this isn't just some optional add-on, you know? PRV is so critical. First, it verifies that the remediation actually worked. It confirms the area is free from contamination. It also gives you that official paperwork you might need for insurance or if you ever sell the house. But really, most importantly, it delivers that peace of mind, knowing your property is safe to live in again.
You know, it's funny. We spend so much time and energy thinking about the quality of our food and our water, but we take something like 20,000 breaths a day, and most of those are indoors. So the final thought I really want to leave you with is this. You know what's in your food, you know what's in your water, but you really know what's in your air.